Hi there, my name is Deacon and welcome to 4G, and in this video we're going to be going through all of the different versions of R-Type that are available. I'm just focusing here on the shooting titles because those are the ones I love and sort of remember, or don't in some cases, as we'll be covering systems I've never played before. I've never checked them out. But there are videos on YouTube doing the same thing, but I wanted to provide like a full commentary on each game, as well as like there's a sidebar of information on each title that I've put in as well that's like more concise, I guess, if you want to watch with the sound down and just read those. But I really wanted to cover absolutely everything in the series, and I'm doing so aside from the tactics titles, which obviously take a lot longer to play as they're tactical turn-based games, and I don't really see them as being in the canon of the shooting games as such. It's like they're a different thing, and I may cover them at some point, but probably individually, because to cover each would take a long time. But anyway, I don't want to take a long time with this intro. What you're going to get in this video is level 1 of every R-Type game that I could get my disreputable hands upon, and that's everything. Pretty much, I think I've got everything here. There are some videos here on YouTube, great videos, but some miss out certain games, and I've also got games that are sort of related or are part in some way of the R-Type canon, other shooter games that I thought it's worthwhile taking a look at, even if it's a really quick look, just because at some point they do pop their heads up in the R-Type timeline, or they are related to the R-Type timeline. So without further ado, let's get started, and we're starting off obviously with the original arcade title. The original, and well, is it the best? We'll find out as we head into my video, the first 4G video, R-Type eras. And this is a long one, so get yourself a meal and a beer or something, and I hope you enjoy it. Okay, let's go. All right, well, here we are, you know, this is the original R-Type. I'm not sure, I have it set strange on MAME, I guess. It gave me a lot of credits there, but I'm not going to need a credit. What I'm going to try to do is just, I'm going to play through the first level on every single version, so that you get like the chance to see how things are kept the same or how things differ between all the versions. There are differences, obviously, between all of the different, like, you know, like the home versions and console versions and stuff, but like, you know, there's more similarities than you may think than the differences, and I have a lot of respect for the people who programmed all of these versions. Like, some of them, like, I don't enjoy them that much, but I have enjoyed playing them, and this has been a really interesting task. Notice, like, the background fading in there. There's no parallax, but I mean, you have to remember this was 1987, and it was a lot. Like, this game at the time, it was a lot. They had this in the diner. I live in Washington State. They had this in a diner in Washington State. I don't want to like dox myself or anything, but you know, it captivated me. To say that's like, you know, it's a bit of an understatement, but I hadn't seen a lot of these versions that we're going to go through, and I'm commenting on top of them. I'm not playing as I comment. I don't like to take that final blue reflective option. I left that on the table there. I just like the pure power of like the ripple, the direct laser to take out this big guy. And I always launch, as you can see, I launch the module, the Force, as it's called, straight into the heart of him. But that's R-Type, 1987. What a classic. Alright, so before we get stuck right into the R-Type stuff, all the conversions and such, like, I thought I would just take like a quick diversion with you guys into Battle Chopper, or also known as Mr. Heli. Now this is just, I wanted to be complete here and try and get in everything, like everything R-Type related. This is a real tenuous one, but basically the character that you're playing as here, that you see on screen, the little helicopter, it actually made an appearance in R-Type Final, which has like 100 ships, 101 ships, I believe. So I just wanted to put that on the table before we carried on. It's a good game, but it's not like anything like R-Type. It's completely different, but at the same time, it's technically, canonically part of that R-Type universe. In some way, it's there, you know, like the ship is actually there. So anyway, it's Mr. Heli, also known as Battle Chopper. Right, now, I couldn't actually find full-on information about when all these ports were actually made. God, like that music, that's pretty grating. And so I just gone by year, and I've kind of gone by order of merit. So I think kind of in this year, the ZX Spectrum version was like probably my least favorite. I can imagine there's probably a lot of you out there shouting at your screens right now. Yeah, I did that, like, you know, I did that deliberately. I know it's classed or called the ZX Spectrum. So this is the ZX Spectrum version, but, you know, this isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination. It's just my least favorite version that came out that year, for a number of reasons, but it's very accurate, like the positioning and the way that the enemies appear. I mean, it's kind of a triumph, I would say, for the system that it's on. It's like really basic Z80 system. Like, it's the same processor as pretty much as a Game Boy. We'll see more about that later. This was programmed by a guy called Bob Pape, who actually did a book. I mentioned that in the sidebar. The book's called It's Behind You, The Making of a Video Game. And I actually read through that book. It's pretty cool. It's interesting, and it doesn't just cover like the Spectrum version of the game. It also covers some other versions and talks about what was going on in like the stable at the time, if you will, of all of the different conversions of the game. But as I said, I mean, I don't actually think there's much wrong with this conversion. I actually think it's kind of cool for the system and for the era. I mean, it must have been a real blast to get a version of R-Type like so bright and colorful for a system. I believe, from what I've played of like Spectrum games. They're normally pretty monochromatic. It's got like a small palette, but I mean the waves and the way things come on here, it's actually been done really well. You can tell that Bob has paid a lot of attention to the arcade original. I mean, there's versions of this game where I feel they've taken a lot more liberties with actually what happens on screen in order to give you something that's close, but you know, close but no cigar. So this being at the bottom of my list, I guess it's just because I'm like not familiar with it at all, and it felt kind of strange to me, but I did really enjoy playing it. I don't think there's that many versions on this list that I didn't actually enjoy. Probably the worst is the Amstrad, which is like a really strange port of this version. Amstrad is another system I don't know anything at all about. You can blow up the eyes on this guy as well. I was never sure if that was actually necessary or not. But I mean, they've done a good job. It's just clearly laboring, like with the frame rate and, you know, how I'm not sure about the technological aspects of this system, but that's that done. It's not a bad version, but I'm just not a Spectrum guy. I didn't grow up with it, but there you go. It's not bad at all, in fact. So next up we have the MSX system, which is something I didn't know. I did not know anything about whatsoever. You know, you grow up and, you know, your friends have like different systems, or you all have different things. We never had, none of us had like an MSX, but I put this a little above the Spectrum. It's got like quite an aggressive metallic sounding version of the theme tune, like sets your teeth on edge sort of sound. There's a lot of empty real estate in the MSX version. I think it's pretty unique to the MSX and the Amstrad version, where there's just, particularly in this, there's like long tracts where nothing happens. As you can see, there's like nothing going on. It's sort of waiting, and this is one of the versions that obviously is not, you know, it's not trying to do things exactly like the arcade. I'm not sure if there's a reason why there's not a lot happening sometimes, but I like this version for, like, the scrolling's bad, the way it scrolls between, you know, as it goes along, it's like chunk, but I really like the bullets. I like how smooth the enemy bullets are. It's a strange thing, perhaps, to pick up on, but, you know, it's like, look at that. Look at that. Like, I found on the Spectrum version, it was like the bullets were like chunk. They're clearly like moving on some kind of a grid. But in this, I just felt like they felt better. And I understand, you know, maybe the rest of the game, there's some sacrifices been made, some concessions or whatever to get it running on the system. But we've got, you know, the music's here. This guy was like quite strange. It's like different. Again, that's a little creative liberty that's been taken. Normally he doesn't appear till after these huge arms. And I would know. I've played a lot, you know? Like, you know, I've played a lot of R-Type recently, so, you know, I kind of got it burned into my head. So a couple of those guys to dispatch. Now we get the boss, which, from what I remember, it brings the tone down a little of this version, but I think this is a cool version, just mainly because you get that great music. And it is, aside from the scrolling, I think it's kind of smooth. There's not a lot going on, that's one thing I could say, like on screen at any time. But you know, this boss looks cool, it fills the screen. And obviously, always I'm looking to jettison the force like into the front of him. But that's the MSX, so I put that a little above the Spectrum version. Right. Okay, this was the version I actually had when I was a lot younger. This music's really cool. I do really like the music. I would say, you know, this game's actually quite conversions. Like, you know, it's quite different from the arcade version, but like, it's really cool. It's fast. It's quite tough to get through. I put this music for a little while just for people to listen to because it's excellent, you know, it's really, really good. And just great music during the game as well, these sort of Commodore SID sounds. These waves here are like kind of accurate. I think the Spectrum version so far had like the most accurate waves that we saw, just in terms of how everything's put out. I would say that the R9, the ship, is a little slow here on the Commodore version. You do get a speed up, obviously, but I mean, I was just like blown away when I got this home. I was like, wow, it's, you know, it's pretty much the same. And yeah, you got these waves a little different. These aliens just kind of floating. There's some bits that are like, yeah, they're different, you know, they're for sure different. And you have the fade in the background of this cool background art, which, you know, it adds and makes up for a lot, I think. It's pretty cool. It's a shame they couldn't get this part moving. I'm not really sure why it doesn't. But I thought I'm emulating this. I'm emulating all of these. I thought it might have been some kind of emulation thing where I didn't really remember from when I was younger, but I checked it back and it's definitely not. It's a shame they couldn't get that working properly. This part's very condensed. Like, the level is very condensed. Compared to, for example, you know, we just did the MSX, which is much longer. As I said, there's more open space. And again, avoid that blue pickup for the force. I like in R-Type that there's not really many pickups. You don't, like, when you die, you don't lose a whole lot. It gives you the option. It's not like you have like 9 pickups together or something to get back to your level. Now, the balls on the tail, sure, they're flickering a lot, but I think they move really well. But unfortunately, you know, it's just firing. It doesn't fire out the little sperms or whatever, but that was my jam back in the day. So, we're here at the first of the 16-bit versions of the game, and that's the Atari ST version. Again, these are kind of chronological, kind of in order of merit, and I think this one, you know, if you had an ST at the time, like, you probably thought it was pretty, you know, you probably thought it was pretty good, but, you know, looking at it, it's got all of the waves, everything seems kind of correct. A little bit cramped up, perhaps, but what's not correct is the movement of everything. The movement is very much like almost like the Spectrum version, where There's not much of a fluidity to things. You can see how these enemies kind of shudder around the sky. You can also see the bullets jumping quite a lot. I mean, up until now, the MSX version has been... I mean, look at that bullet coming down there. It's like, it's really bad. I was like an Amiga guy when I was younger. I had an Amiga. I had a Commodore 64, then I had an Amiga. I was not really much of an Atari guy. I had a couple of friends who had them, but you know, like I didn't know anyone who had this. I only recently played this, and I'm kind of shocked at how different this version is to the Amiga, and how clearly badly done it is. It was apparently used in some way as a base, but I would say more I guess a proving ground or something for the Amiga version, because the Amiga version is clearly vastly superior, which you will get in most cases when something is cross-platform for these two systems. But the sound as well is really bad. It's just the AY chips. I could never really, how would you say, I could never get that settled in my head as that being an effective way of delivering 16-bit sound when so many other systems, including the Amiga, just did it fantastically. But anyway, that's the Atari ST version. We will see another Atari version at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. And now we move on to... Some people might be a little pissed about this, like Atari aficionados, that I put their Atari version below. But remember, this is chronological as well. But this is actually the Sega Master System version, which I'd never played before doing this video. And it's actually, it's really good. It's got all the waves, and there's a little bit of flicker, but I think it has more. I mean, you could see that shot as well from that little ship. It just works, it's it's really, I think it's pretty good. Everything's kind of small. Some of the stuff that's larger in the main game has been made a little smaller, but it shares stuff in common with the MSX version in that it's just the bullets move really, really smoothly, and the collision detection is also excellent. Hitboxing on some of these games can be a little off. I'm kind of good at R-Type, and I rekindled that flame by doing this video, so there's actually no deaths in the entire playthroughs of all of these games, all of these versions. I didn't want you to sit and watch me dying either, so I thought it was quite important just to actually be able to play through it properly. But this is a cool version. I think if I'd had a Master System in the past, I would have been absolutely pleased that this was our version of R-Type that we had. I mean, it's got the music, the graphics are nice, the scrolling is really, really nice. Just in general, it plays a lot as it should. One thing that's kind of strange, I think, about this version, and presumably to give more real estate on the screen, is there's actually no score. You only get your score at the end of the level, and it's not a deal breaker. It's a strange situation though. It's like an arcade game, so scores kind of it's kind of important. But look at this tail go, and sure, there's a little flickering, but it's really smooth. And I was just trying to get the force launched into that face there. Obviously the background disappears. I'm not sure why. It's probably an overheads thing, but that's a good version of the game. You know, for such an old console, that's a good version. Okay, so this is sort of like a quantum leap up in quality, and it's also, I believe, the first version of R-Type to present like a kind of like an animated intro. It's the Japanese system, the NEC PC88VA. There is a PC88, but there is a version of the game on that called S-Type, but it's borderline. Well, I think I would say it's not even borderline. It's pretty much, you know, it's pretty much unplayable. Like, I appreciate they've tried to do and bring out the game on that system for owners of that system, but in some cases, you know, it's like it's better, you know, just not to bother sometimes, and I think that was one of those situations. But this is R-Type on the 88VA, which was a more superior, faster system. You can choose what level you want to start on. Now this is impressive. I was impressed by this. I hadn't played this or the TurboGrafx 16 version of the game, and you know, by like looking at it, you can see from the start the movements relatively smooth. They're kind of like 3/4 of the way between the arcade version and the ST. Well, they're like 1/4 of the way toward the ST. There's a slight amount of jank, there's a slight bit of jerk to the way things move, but I think ultimately this is a really, really good version. Like if I'd had, and well, it's unlikely, I think it's pretty much was only for the Japanese market in those days. But if I'd had an 88VA, I would have been super happy with this version. Like super happy. You can see as well, not only are the bullets moving like really, really smoothly, but they're also kind of two-tone. They're like little lava bolts or something like that. It just looks really good. And there's a slight bit of jerk in this as it moves around, but these are done on systems that didn't really have, well, it didn't have any sort of scaling or sprite rotation by default. If you wanted to rotate a sprite, you had to draw the next direction where it would be going. So, you know, it's not just a question of onboard chips handling these things for you. So these are pretty tight, I would say. And the backgrounds are absolutely great. It looks the part, it plays the part, it sounds the part. I think this is when we start to get into really the first versions of the game that are really super impressive. And you know, this is a super impressive version. I don't think in any of these playthroughs, like, I don't think I ever take that blue power up at the end. Look at the tail as well. It's really, really smooth. Probably the smoothest we've seen so far, save for the arcade original. It looks great. That end of level boss looks great. The explosion's great. There's not any sort of glitching or flickering in particular. It looks, I think this is the first time we're getting like a real almost arcade experience. Alright, so we had the 88VA, the NEC system. Now we're on the TurboGrafx 16. This is the last of the conversions from 1988, and what a conversion. I also thought when I first played this, I was like, wow, it's like even cooler than the arcade because you can also move horizontally. Like they've added that, but actually it turns out it's to do with the resolution. In order for it to fit the full playfield that one would expect to see in the arcade title, it actually has to move up and down slightly. I think for me they could have missed that out. I really would not have noticed, but you know, it's nice that they actually put that in order to try and make it more, even though it's taking it away from the arcade original version, it's trying to make it more arcade perfect by including the correct amount of space, so that's pretty cool. Very smooth. I think the game, in a lot of ways, it's one of the key points that can be judged on those rockets, and also the rotation of this area. This, I don't know what you would call that, this creature or mini-boss. And it's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. The music is also really good on this version. The speed is great. It scrolls really well. There's absolutely zero slowdown. I didn't mention that on the ST version, by the way. I got kind of sidetracked talking about other things. I'm just talking live, but yeah, particularly in later levels on the Atari one, I did play it quite a bit. It slows down like a lot. It's not very impressive at all. It gets worse, basically. But this one's got like the full background, everything fading in and out. Here's this boss, and look how smooth the tail is. Look how great it looks. I mean, I would say that's pretty much arcade perfect. I managed to launch the force into the wrong place there, which wasn't that smart. But the explosion's great, it's fast, it plays well. PC Engine, TurboGrafx 16 version, pretty much arcade perfect. Okay, so this is an offshoot. This is pretty tenuous stuff, but basically this is again like Mr. Heli, in that the main ship from this actually features in R-Type Final, the main ship that we're seeing here. And this is also an interesting game for one other reason, in that you have the speed at the bottom of the screen. And you can see, like, I'm moving through the speed. I jumped up to speed 3. It depends how you want to maneuver, basically. Sometimes it's good to be slow, other times it's good to be fast. Well, that's pretty much what was applied in the much later versions of R-Type. I mean, it skipped on a lot of years from this time until that was implemented, but I think, you know, you could definitely say that this was the first implementation of that in a game. This is kind of primitive, this game. It's more like a basic vertical blaster. It doesn't have the same personality as R-Type, I wouldn't have said. It's got the interesting sort of force orb, but the force never upgrades. You can choose a red force that aims different directions that you were last pressing, so it's kind of good for shooting things around you, or the blue force that just fires directly in front, that I kind of prefer because I just like to have as many shots as possible going forwards at what I'm shooting at. But this game, as it moves on, starts to throw more things at you from behind. I believe there's something just about to come. So yeah, you will get attacked from behind and such like as well, where the red is like really, really helpful. It's a good game. It's not a bad game. But I think it is interesting because you do have that speed indicator down the bottom that did become quite useful in the later R-Type games. Albeit not for several years after this, but they obviously kept that idea on the back boiler. And of course the ship features in another much later R-Type title. So, we've just come from the end of 1988 with the excellent TurboGrafx-16 version, and we come, well, I would say hurtling into 1989, but it's more stumbling because this is the Amstrad version. I don't know anything about the Amstrad as a system. It was another European system, but this is pretty terrible. I think out of all of the versions I played, like, in fairness, it is playable, but I would say it really lacks everything in the spirit that makes it R-Type. It's support. Obviously, it's support. It's a clean port of the Spectrum version, but for some reason, they've removed, like, all of the color. You have a completely monochrome background, and the foreground is always in green, white, or this light blue color, which it's probably a personal thing, but it makes me think of dental hygiene when I'm looking at this game. And that's not what I want to be thinking about when I'm playing probably one of the most influential space blasters of all time. But it's slow. It's painfully slow. And the ZX Spectrum version was quite slow, but it had the color and the movement, and I'm sure it was faster than this. And this contains the same movement system where you move like block by block. If I press up or down, it will move like an 8x8 square in either direction. It's not smooth. Neither of these versions were smooth. They have nice parallax star fields in the background, I guess. It's not just nothing. But this is a really poor conversion. But I think you have to make allowances. And I understand the guy. It says on the right, you make one little mistake in your life and the internet will never let you live it down. Electric Dreams and Activision gave me 21 days to do the port. I wish I had the time to do a nice Mode Zero port with new graphics, but alas, it was never to be. And that's Keith Goodyear, who was the programmer on the Amstrad version. There's a little talk about that in Bob Pape's book that I previously mentioned when talking about the Spectrum version. This team, or this guy, I mean, it's not really even a team. I mean, that's the thing you have to remember. These were often like kids, or they were really young people making these versions in those days. So it was very much a sort of the beginnings of what we now know to be the most valuable entertainment industry on the face of the planet. I mean, video games are huge now, right? You know? But back then it was different. There was a lot of money to be made, but it was still very much in its infancy, and the people who could code these things were often not readily available, and also themselves very much in their infancy. So that's what's happened with R-Type. Not an inexperienced programmer, but a programmer who was basically forced to finish the project in a ridiculous time frame of 21 days. So what could he do but port the Spectrum version that was already finished and already ready to go, already gold, as they would say. So it's a shame, but also along with the Atari ST version, watch at the end of this video when we're actually going to see a little redemption story for the Amstrad version, and we're going to see what could have been had this gentleman had more time, and the Mode Zero the Mode 0 port that he mentions. Mode 0 is apparently a different color style or programming mode for the Amstrad, or graphical mode is the correct term, I believe, where the graphics would be notably different. More like the Commodore. I think it's like 2 pixels long, one up to look at them, rectangular pixels, but you could have full color. And the games could basically look a lot nicer than this. Even though they looked a little more chunky, they would have more of a defined Amstrad-esque look, as each console at that time did have its own style of look. I believe also the BBC Micro and the Commodore 64 could do similar modes, I believe so. But they were seldom used because of the fact that they would almost always have to be in monochrome, if not always. I'm not a technical expert about these things. I know very little about the BBC. I know it was like a school computer for like colleges in the United Kingdom. And I don't know, maybe in other places in Europe, but it's strange. Back in those days, like pre-internet, you took what you could get, and your countries had what they had based on certain marketing deals. That was difficult. It was actually more difficult than the Spectrum version to actually get the force into the heart of the monster, but it did not move towards me. In some of the versions it will advance. It didn't in the Amstrad. It was very plain. I think that's the worst. It's playable, but it's probably the worst. I would have let that music play for like a lot longer, arguably all eternity. It's such a great piece of music, and it's even better in that it was nothing to do with actually R-Type at all. It was just something that Chris Holzbeck decided to do off his own back, and it's incredible. It's an incredible piece of music. If you want to seek it out, just seek out R-Type Amiga theme. It's not present on any of the other original versions, and what a theme it is. Now here we are with, this is a good version. I was really impressed by this. I was really impressed by this when I was younger and had this game. I played it a lot. You can see when in comparison to the ST version, obviously we have the excellent sound, and the movement of all of the enemies is so much better, and of course you can see the bullets that are moving. That's kind of what I'm gauging this on a lot of the time. The arcade accuracy, but also just in general how good it looks. Unfortunately here we don't have a backdrop, which is, it's kind of unfortunate, but you can see those rockets are like super smooth, and that enemy was quite smart. And also that deadly circle of droids, the deadly Bido circle, was also super smooth. It's fast as well, like really fast. It's not dropping frames. But whatever different kind of weapon, I mean, this is really impressive. For a home computer that's not a dedicated game system, it's super impressive. There are hurdles made or corners cut here and there, but ultimately, when you're looking at it, I think it's a really great version of R-Type. And everything happens as it should. I think that's the most important. It doesn't really matter if the game looks bad and if it doesn't have to sound great, but if everything happens as it should, I think that's the way to a good arcade conversion. There's lots of good arcade conversions where, it's not going to be as 100% as an arcade machine, but everything's correct. But That was the Amiga version. Really, really good. Really great home 16-bit conversion. So we move on. This is a system that's not so well known in the West. This is the Sharp X68000. It's almost kind of like a home computer version of the PC Engine. I'm not sure on the specifics or the innards. You know, I'm not like a nerd like that with like tech specs and things like that, and so I just really love gaming. Like, I'm definitely a nerd like that, you know. I love to play video games, but I've never really, like, when I was younger, you could see there as well, I just interrupt myself, the collision detection on this version is really, really good. Really good. And some of the hitboxing on the other versions is not so great. A little jitter to the rockets there. But yeah, I'm a person who really, really loves video games. I love to play video games. You know, it's not... I don't know the tech specs of a lot of these systems, and when asked, I couldn't say, like, why these versions are bad, but I think that in some ways is good, because I'm telling you from a gaming point of view which versions are the best and which versions have not only stood the test of time but stand up against the arcade. And this is another of these versions. I would say, for me personally, it's a personal thing, but I prefer the PC Engine version. But this has back to, it's not scrolling up and down, it's not moving up and down, so it's got that same claustrophobia as the arcade. The graphics are very similar. It's got the great background, unlike the Amiga version. It's got everything that should be in the game. But I feel, just personally, I think I prefer the PC Engine version up until now. This game, you can see the tail's pretty smooth. That's one thing I judge this end scene by. It's pretty much the only thing that moves. Now, obviously there's the creature in the middle, but that's the Sharp 68000 version, and you can see he's making advances as well, which a lot of the versions don't actually do. They just stay still. So that's another point for the 68000 for arcade accuracy. That's a good one. So, R-Type 2 hit in 1989 and offered basically more of what the original was so famous for, and I think it did it really well. Some people have mixed memories of this game, but I think it's an excellent space shoot 'em up. I think it's not on a par with, but I guess it's as good as the original for me, but it's not quite on par, because the original was the original. It sort of laid the template down, whereas this just picks up the ball and runs with it, which is no bad thing. And it brings a lot of new things to the table, and of course it has that super famous underwater level as level 2, which is really cool. And it did definitely offer some different challenges to the original. For example, this part that I'm flying through now, there's nothing like that in the original R-Type. And these snakes, it's just a different style of enemy. Well, fully different styles of enemies, but more patterns to learn, and it goes with the pattern-based gameplay also, which I think is really important. I think that's part of R-Type that, at least to me, is what makes an R-Type game. Like, sure, you could make like a space shoot 'em up or a blaster, or like some bullet hell game or the like, but R-Type's different. R-Type is more about... I've seen some people call R-Type a puzzle game, and I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's correct at all. But I would say it's about pattern memorization. It's all about patterns and memorizing. Obviously, the fire comes from different places or different individuals in a troupe, if you were, but I just find it's more about memorization, and this offered a whole new load of things to memorize. Even this final boss is like a souped up version of the original level final boss. Not a difficult one, as you can see, but that was R-Type 2 for the arcade, and we'll look at some more versions of that. That's an excellent game. It's well worth playing if you're not familiar with it. Now, this, to me, is one of the more interesting versions of R-Type because it's on the Game Boy, and it's one of those games that you might look at if you were a gamer or the owner of the license and just think, this is not possible. But yet, here we have, this is a fully fledged port of the game. And it harkens back in some way to the ZX Spectrum version, as the team who were responsible for this game, Bit Studios, the same gentleman, Bob Pape, was actually responsible for the Game Boy version of R-Type 2, which is not so fondly remembered as this initial conversion, but this was a guy called Jazz Austin, who I've looked into and seems to be a very popular British programmer of games. This is like a sort of dream team of programmers, a little like, I believe it was Argonaut, who originally tried to do vectors on the Game Boy when it was considered by Nintendo to be totally impossible. And their experiments with those early designs led them to work on Star Fox for the SNES, which obviously became like a huge hit. So, you know, Mighty Oaks and all those things, but this is a fantastic version. I mean, it's not often with Game Boy games you would get it's like a rough approximation of something from the title, just for the sake of selling a few copies, but this is R-Type. It's unmistakably R-Type. It plays really well. I would say, in fact, it plays better than the Spectrum version. The only drawback of this version itself is that there are a couple of levels missing. I believe even maybe 3 levels missing. But above and beyond that, you know, this is R-Type. It's unmistakably R-Type. It plays like R-Type, it feels like R-Type, and it's a really, really good conversion. And for a portable version, it's great. So now we're going back in time to the original R-Type, and we find a complete CD version of R-Type for the TurboGrafx-16, which is also known as the PC Engine. This has a really long and involved intro as well, which is, you know, it's like completely unnecessary. It doesn't add anything to the game. I think they presumed that because it was possible to add this stuff to the disc that people would somehow want it. But I don't think so. I think people just wanted to play R-Type instead of watching this kind of weird sort of soap opera. It's really stereotypical. It does nothing particularly interesting, hence I just put a little bit of it here. That's a bit like R-Type 2 almost. But there's not much difference in this game. Listen. It's got a kind of cool soundtrack, but it's a bit like those arrange modes like Outrun 2006 and such like, where you would have like an arranged version of the original soundtrack, which I'm not sure why. It seems like in Japan that means like it's a redone version of the soundtrack or re-recording. Like an arranged piece of music to me would mean like a different arrangement in like a different order or something, or like an orchestral piece that have been reorganized, but it's not like that. It's just different instruments, but it's kind of more jazzy, kind of a little bit more breezy and open. But is it actually any better? Well, I would say the jury's out, but my jury's not really out. I like it, but I think the original version is actually better. I much prefer it. It just has more urgency and feels more threatening and more like a good piece of music for a shoot-'em-up game. This could be good for a driving game, but I think the universe is fairly short on R-Type themed driving games. I think I've been pretty exhaustive in my search for finding R-Type styled games, and I didn't come across any that were automotive based in my search, but it's basically the same, this version, as the TurboGrafx or PC Engine. The original PC Engine version in Japan actually came on 2 cards, so this was like unifying those 2 cards. They were actually released as R-Type 1 and 2, but it was just 2 parts, the first and second half of the original game. That's a good speed on that, but I don't know. It's the same as the TurboGrafx, but the music's like different. Is it better? It's different. So, up next, we have, this is the Amiga version of R-Type 2, which you can see the title screen is almost exactly the same. Unfortunately, in this game, they didn't have the same fantastic, unique music as the original had on its title screen. That you can see here, it's already very similar, very reminiscent. The music is slightly different, but it's also, it's close to the original. Some of the colors are close. It's one of those games where if you don't play it next to the original, you almost think it's just as good. But it does have, well, there are some caveats, and there are some things that make it slightly different. There's a lack of color, and you might look at this and say, like, Deacon, there's plenty of color here, but compared to the arcade, they've made some very good choices with their color palette. That's what I would say, because the Amiga is not able to display the same amount of colors as the arcade original. But everything else, there's a lot of stuff that the arcade does that's obviously still here in the Amiga version. The frame rate, and there's a little slowdown, but ultimately, I think this is a very good version of the game. And again, it was one that made me very proud to own an Amiga, and to have this game, to have other games like this. And obviously I didn't use it in the previous video, but you do have that. There's an advanced version of the Force build-up weapon. I forget what that's called. My memory's really bad. I'm old. I'm sorry. But you know, it's like the Force cannon or the Force plasma. We used to call it the plasma weapon, but it's not called that. I think it's the wave or something like that. It's slightly strange. And there's interesting also one-off characters in this game that will appear and maybe never appear again. And I like that. I always liked that in the R-Type series, where they had very varied forces. It felt like you were somewhere where there was things happening. That's the enemy taken out. It's a good version, Amiga version, R-Type 2. And now we're straight into the Atari ST version. Now, this version I think is actually really pretty good. I don't think it's as good as the Amiga version, but I do think it's a real step up from the Atari ST original version of R-Type, which was really, really poor. I mean, that tunnel sequence, for example, is not as good as the Amiga version, but they have it, you know, at least it's like there. And the music, although it's still, I just can't really wrap my head around the AY chip. I always found it feels like a previous generation sort of sound chip. And when I found out through playing from emulation that it was the same chip that's on the ZX Spectrum, like the 128K models, I was kind of shocked that Atari went with that for a 16-bit system. I thought that was like a weird choice, but you can see here, unfortunately, that crippling slowdown, once again rearing its head. It's just not able to cope on the same level that the Amiga could, or that other systems can with this game. Now, I don't know if that's a programming error or a problem, or someone could have optimized the game better, but ultimately this is the release version, and I am going through the release versions, but you can see this is like really, really slow, and there's not much need for this to be. Look at the oncoming fireballs there, the oncoming shots from the enemy. Really, really not up to much. And it just feels, this feels like a prototype. It feels like an unoptimized prototype of the Amiga version, if I'm being honest. And, you know, if you had an ST, then like, you know, it's probably the best version you're going to get. But I just find it's quite uninspiring. It looks really good. It looks like they've basically, it's very close to the Amiga version, but they've paid the price as a result of getting these graphics so good, because they are good. I think they are good graphics for the Atari ST. But the sound is kind of non-existent, completely non-existent, which is another thing in these games. It's good to have it. I think it's good to have sound. Several of these versions just have like music, or it's like an either or. It's like music or sound. It's not always both. But I just think this suffers for that. The AY music, I think I would rather, if I was offered, I think I would rather take the sound. Which is a strange thing to say, but the graphics are good. It's all good, and on that front, it looks very like the Amiga version. I would imagine these were probably both ported at the same time, or the Amiga version gave the bones to this Atari version, but there's something lacking in this amongst the sound, the slowdown. I think if you can, the Amiga version is the preferred version of the 16-bit home systems, at least the Western home systems for sure. This guy's, I think I take this guy out really quickly again. Oh no, obviously not. It's weird, you can take this guy out with like one charge blast, but if you fail, it can take like a long time to actually get rid of him. I'm not sure on the logic of that. It's like I remember that game, I was talking with someone about that recently, the game Panzer Kickboxing. Sometimes you would just land like a lucky blow. But yeah, that was kind of an unlucky blow. That's the Atari version. Okay, this one's a little different. This is Super R-Type. It's on the Super Nintendo, on the SNES, and it's trying its best. But I'm not a great fan of this. There's several reasons why not. I think there are some really good later levels in the game. Some of the later levels are actually really good. But this game really wants you to learn. It's taking the memorization, I think, a little too far, if I would say, in that it expects you to just do the entire level with one continue. There are no continue points in these levels, so you have to complete each level from the start. If you die, then you will go back to the start. And I find this level, I always think, you know, play your best hand first in terms of these games to bring people in. Like if someone's looking at this game in a store, for example, you have to think, like, would they actually look at this as a fan of R-Type? I mean, this is pretty bland. What we're seeing at the moment is not that exciting. So, you know, there's that. And then, of course, they double down on, oh, you know, they have that ring that goes round in the original. What if there were two? It's strange in that this is not a conversion or a port of any particular version of R-Type. It contains the DNA, obviously, of a little of both R-Type 1 and 2. There's that guy from R-Type 2, for example. I quite like the music. It's quite cool. But this game also has, I would say, at points, it does have some slowdown issues, especially later in the game when there's a lot of stuff happening on screen. It's also got that strange situation where you warp to a boss. You don't come across the boss on the level. I think this is one of the most unimaginative bosses on R-Type also. It's just, it goes around laying mines. It's like really boring. I think above all, this is a bad example for this game. It's actually, it can be better. It's worth playing if you want to be a completionist, but R-Type 3 on the SNES is a lot better. Right, now this is another offshoot. This is Armed Police Unit Gallop, also known as Cosmic Cop. And while obviously R-Type takes place as a sort of last-ditch war against the Baidu Empire, very much in sort of space or in alien worlds, this one's actually taking place on a sort of human homeworld, of kinds anyway. I couldn't get 4 G's there, so I've got GGG, which is also, it's kind of, those of you who explore more nefarious angles of the internet might actually recognize that. I'm not responsible for that. That's just this game blocking me from putting my full name. But this is interesting as a game. It's weird. It's obviously it's a lot further in, it's a lot more zoomed in. And it kind of works like a race almost. Every level has a certain time that you've got to get through in order to catch a vehicle that's been driven mad. A robotic vehicle that's been driven mad by Baidu engineering, or it's been like a robot, reprogrammed, I suppose, or it's been hacked by Baidu interference, if you will. So that's kind of interesting, and that's, you know, obviously where the link to R-Type comes, but this ship is also available in R-Type, I think, once again in R-Type Final with its over 100 ships. It would always say over 100 ships. There's 101 ships, so it's not a misnomer to say there's over 100, but it's a little cheeky, I always used to think, because there are only 101, but still, that's an insane amount of ships. It's like You know, that was designed to be the final game, so where you were supposed to unlock all those ships and play with all those ships, you know, until like the end of time. And they are all different. They are all different. They're not all the same. It's not just a different skin. But yeah, that's Armed Police Unit Gallop. It's interesting. It's in the same universe as R-Type. Cosmic Cop to some people. It's worth playing, but it's nothing standout. It's more fun and throwaway and try to move as fast as you can through the levels kind of game. But it's interesting enough. And so we're back to the Game Boy. It's a really nice title screen, I think. The presentation on these Bits Studios games, I think, are really good. I like these little guys. So I've always been like a fan of games that have like little guys in them. I really liked Wings of Fury and Walker and games like that on the Amiga. I think there should be more games with little guys, especially if you have the option to destroy them and really ruin their shit. But this game was actually programmed, or this conversion was actually programmed by Bob Pape, who handled the original ZX Spectrum version. And it's a mixed bag. For me, I definitely prefer the original R-Type on the Game Boy, but that's not to say that this is not a good game. It is a good game. It's good fun. But it feels a little cheap, and some of the collisions, I would say the collisions are worse. The collision detection is worse than the original. And in a lot of R-Type games, that's kind of unforgivable because you're by the seat of your pants, if you follow the analogy. And it's really important to be able to trust that if a bullet goes near you, it's not going to kill you. And you can see already, we've looked at R-Type 2, you can see that section is very dramatically kind of cut down. We have the water beneath instead of the sand, so there's no sandworms coming up at you. But that's kind of to be understood if you're playing a version like this on such a small handheld. As I said in the Spectrum review of this game, the Game Boy actually runs on, I'm not sure if it's exactly the same, but it's a version of the Z80 processor. I think was basically the same as the Spectrum, which is possibly why these people were able to wring so much out of the system. I mean, this has parallax, which is really impressive, you know, compared to, obviously, the Spectrum version didn't have that. So it worked out pretty good. It looks pretty cool. And we're coming up to the end again. The ship looks good. The gameplay is good. The screen is perhaps a little small. That's not a reference to the actual Game Boy screen. It's just a reference to how much real estate you can see at any one time. But this is a fair version, I think. That's the end of that. It's worth picking this up in the compilation, the R-Type DX collection. Okay, this is R-Type Leo. And there's a kind of strange story behind this one. It was never supposed to be an R-Type game. It's also the first R-Type, I believe, to offer a simultaneous two-player play, which may actually benefit the game substantially. I'm not a huge fan of this game. I like the weapons. I think they're cool. But you can tell that it was never really meant to be an R-Type game. It was by another company, and then IRM ended up taking it on, and they obviously decided, right, we're gonna reskin this. It's good enough to be an R-Type, and it's a good game, but it doesn't have that sort of, it doesn't have the memory magic of R-Type, of sort of remembering things Sure, it does to an extent, but by the time you get to the end of the game, it's very much like a typical arcade shoot-'em-up in that it just throws everything, including the kitchen sink, at you. And you have to spend a lot of money, or I always had to spend a lot of money. I never finished this in an arcade because it was just too expensive to play. I really wanted to, but I never could because it was too expensive. But I have been multiple times to the end of the game via emulation, and I more play this with friends, so it's like a pretty rare occasion that I get to play it. I don't have people visiting very often. I live kind of in the middle of nowhere. But yeah, while it's fun, is it like an R-type game? I don't know. I don't really think so. I think there's like a lot of R-type DNA in here, and there are some cool things taking place. There's also some, some of these items and objects and enemies and stuff are really cool. The graphics are cool. I like how this level's kind of split into three. There's kind of three distinct kind of areas. I like this new the Ripple version laser. But for me, yeah, this is not peak R-Type. I think it's a shame there was no more R-Type in the arcade after this, because I think one final send-off would have been really fantastic, and they could have done better. It's not to say this is bad, but I think it's a little unfair towards the end. It's a little cheap. But it looks good, it plays good, and it's two-player. Right, so this is R-Type 3, the third Lightning, and this never actually made it to the arcade. It was only a Super NES title until, of course, it debuted on the Game Boy Advance, which is a slightly inferior version in my opinion if you want to play R-Type 3. I think the SNES version is definitely the version to play. I have a kind of love-hate relationship with this game. I did have a SNES when I was younger, and I enjoyed this game, but it fixes a lot of what was wrong with the original. But I kind of just wanted a port of R-Type 2 because, as I said in the R-Type 2 review, a lot of people don't actually like that game too much, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. And I kind of expected that the SNES version, or the next game in the series on the SNES, would in fact be R-Type 2. But it wasn't. It was, with Super R-Type, we got something that's pretty different from the original, and with R-Type 3, we also get something that is quite different from the original. But not, I don't think, in a bad way. But also, unfortunately, with R-Type 3, I think this first level is probably the worst to show, but I just wanted to get through it and show people a little of what the game contains. It's not a bad representation, but I think the game actually gets better in the later levels. This is interesting as well because it's probably the longest single R-Type level that we've gone through, or that we will go through in this video. I kind of get the impression this is probably the longest. I think it's even longer than the Amstrad, but there is stuff happening here all the time, but it's kind of ugly. It doesn't really set the game up that well compared to how detailed and excellent. There's some really good levels in this game, I'm not gonna lie about that. And I was into this game, but I just kind of wanted like the arcade version. But at the same time, this offers a completely system unique challenge that until the Game Boy Advance version, the version of whom we shall not speak its name, until of course we have to cover it in this long form series of reviews. it offered something totally unique. This wasn't available on any other system aside from the Super NES, so, and it does do some different things. You have the Force Blast there. If you level that up, you have Beam, and there's another mode, I forget what it's called. We'll see probably in this video. I'll keep an eye out. If you keep an eye out on the beam bar, it will change. It's like Hyper or something like that, and it basically unleashes like a huge blast that's pretty cool. And then like after the blast has gone off, you're able to continue firing in like this really powerful sort of fire pattern. I think I actually enable that shortly, so I guess we're going to see that. There's these guys, like, they're like internet tough guys of the 1990s. Oh, wow. And this is from 1993, and you can see, obviously, it makes use of the scaling capabilities and the rotational capabilities that were obviously on board on the SNES console, or I think in the UK, I don't understand why in the UK and Europe they call it the SNES. I kind of grew used to that through watching content from Europeans, but to me it's always the Super Nintendo or the SNES. It's the Super NES, it's not a SNES. But anyway, this garbage that's falling around is quite annoying as it flies around. This section is actually, there are some differences in the sections between this and the Game Boy Advance version. This section is actually doable by rotating around, like as I've just done. On the outside, I guess you could probably stay in the middle. It probably makes a little more sense. But on the Game Boy Advance version, that is not possible. You have to go right and stay in the middle, otherwise you will be destroyed on the outside. And here's an example of the sort of scaling and rotation capabilities of the SNES being put to good work. As I said, I think this is probably the most inferior level in the whole game, which is unfortunate. It's a really good game. Like, if you want to play a good R-type game that's fair, that's not like bordering on bullet hell like Leo was. As I said, I think Leo is a really good game. I'm just not sure if it's a really good R-type game. It's very different when you boil it all down. But you have obviously the unique standard R-type weaponry here. I think what stands R-type apart from a lot of these other shooters and other games that look to take its crown, if you will, are the weapons, and they're part of the R-type DNA. I think when they're removed, the game becomes kind of different, especially if you remove the force weapon or try and do something kind of different. R-type's a classic case of, with gaming, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. People understand it. It's like an unwritten piece of perfection in the gaming community. This kind of reminds me of Space Harrier, the way these orbs come towards you and the style that they're presented in, the sort of ovoid, or I don't know what you would call that shape, like a crushed egg or something like that. And this character is zooming in and out using the Super FX scaling, which is cool. It's good to see. It's probably, again, a little like Super R-type. It's the weakest boss in the game in terms of visual appearance. There's some really, really good bosses in this game for sure. Some really cool ones. And later on, just like screen-filling madness. They're really, really cool. It's good to see. And it's inventive in that, you know, none of these bosses featured anywhere else, but you know, I think, like, you know, if you have a Super Nintendo and you want to play R-Type, this one's got continues as well, which the other one didn't have. or rather checkpoints in the levels, which kind of made the original Super R-Types just too brutal for a lot of people. But it's worth a go. I think R-Type 3 is the one to get for the SNES. Now, this one's a little left field because it's not really got anything. It doesn't have any connective tissue when it comes to like the design teams and the company that released it. But I think like in a lot of ways, like I wish this had been released instead of R-Type Leo as R-Type 3. I think this is a really good game. It had a sequel following up called Blazing Star. This is a difficult game. Like, it's not an easy game to play or to master. But I just feel like, even from the look at it now, it just feels so like R-Type. And the pickups and everything are just super, super identical. I like the music. I like the graphics. The graphics have this sort of, I believe they're scanned or rendered three-dimensional, so they have this sort of pop to them that's not seen in other games in the series. But you can see from the spiraling red ships to these opening ship launchers and such like, this is really, really clearly, and the jumping ship and the force on the front of the craft, this is clearly heavily influenced by R-Type. As a snake, it's just really identical to R-Type 2. And as I said, if this was R-Type 3, if you will, in the arcades, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. They're trying something new with the graphics, but ultimately the gameplay is very R-Type in style. It's also kind of slow, but that's not a negative. It never gets too slow, or too fast rather, to be able to figure out what's going on. It's not throwing like insane amounts of stuff at you. That was my main gripe, my main problem with R-Type Leo, is as the game goes on, I don't really see how it's possible to play that game without losing a fantastic amount of lives. This is very like the ship launcher from, obviously, from R-Type 2, and those are like the pincer claws from the original R-Type. There's a lot here. That's clearly a love letter to the original game. I've like leveled up the force now. But as I said, a lot of people criticize this game for being too hard, and I don't think it's too difficult at all. I think it's just a matter of getting used to it. I find it fair, not particularly over the top. It's got cool bosses, cool gameplay, and I think it's worth your time. This guy is kind of like the original boss at the end of the first level of the original R-Type, with the snake kind of taking the place of the tail. It's a little like a mix between the boss at the end of R-Type 1 and R-Type 2. The sound's great as well, the music's really good, and I think this is a worthwhile game to play. So that's Pulstar. It's on the arcade, and it's also on Neo-Geo Kart. I would imagine the two are identical, more or less. Right now, to be honest, I wanted to give that sound its true reverence, because for a lot of us out here watching this video, that sound invokes a lot of good feelings, good memories, great thoughts, great recollections about all of the great titles that were available on the PS1, which many of us, it was like the first time you were just getting straight up arcade quality stuff at home. And we also, in a lot of these games, we got some remakes, which of course this kind of is, I guess it is a remake, but I mean, kids looking at this nowadays would be like really unimpressed. Be like, this sucks, this, like, why could, you know, these graphics are terrible, but for us, this was like super cool back at the time, just like super, super impressive. And I'm talking over this guy because you can't actually hear him. It's a really badly put together introduction audio-wise. The images are kind of cool, but the audio is actually really bad. And it's very hard, or it becomes impossible to make out what's actually being said. This alarm sound features in a lot of things. It must be like on some Hollywood effects disc or something like that, because it's in so many things. It's like the sort of the Wilhelm scream of alarm noises. For those of you who don't know what the Wilhelm scream is, you should look it up. It's in so many films. It's like once you're aware of it, you can't turn your awareness off. And occasionally it will just like lift you out of a movie when you hear like, oh, there's the Wilhelm scream, like again. It's in a lot of stuff. You can be watching something with a friend, you're like, oh, it's a Wilhelm scream. And they're like, what's a Wilhelm scream? And then, of course, you open the door for them. And after that, they can't really watch anything without thinking about the Wilhelm scream. But this is a cool intro. You know, it gets the pulse going. It has like a really, I think this is it. Yeah, there we go. It's like a really odd, kind of bad 3D CGI version of what looks like the ship from level 3 of R-Type. And I guess it probably is, as this game is a recreation of R-Type 1 and R-Type 2. And it was done by someone at IREM who wanted to make like a proof of concept, like, you know, like to prove like to the bosses that it was gonna be, you know, like it was possible to make an R-Type game that people would be interested in. But now we're diving in, and like oh my god, when you play this game, it's like, wow, it's so fast. You have the option for auto fire, which is really, it's like a murderous auto fire. Like, I really like auto fire in games. I feel like over the years I've got like a touch of, I guess you would call it vibration white finger from just pressing these buttons so fast. I got to a way of like, almost like it's like the Tetris hyper tapping that's now become a thing in the Tetris community. I believe it's almost like that. It's just like feathering the button so much to such an extent that you get out like such fast movements from it, but also I think it's pretty bad for the joints in your finger and like the cartilage bones in between your knuckles and such like. But this is incredible to me. I think honestly, when we're looking at versions of R-Type, the original R-Type and R-Type 2, these are the best. These were never equaled. I don't think these were equaled. I wish I still had my disc of this. My PlayStation started to like crap out like a couple of years after I got it, and I had to run it upside down, and then I kind of got disinterested in it for a bit and got more interested in playing guitar and making music and stuff like that. And then I jumped back in for the PlayStation 4, which I think is a great system, and it has, you know, a lot of great games, but does it have this? No. I wish it did, but to buy a copy of this is very expensive now. So once again, I would suggest anyone who wants to play this, there is no shame in emulating games. Like, I have friends who have a big collection of these original systems, and it's like it's a money pit. It's like a real cash sink. But look how fast this is. Like, the important thing, we're going to look at R-Type 2 from the same R-Types collection now, the first level of that. The most important thing with this is it's not emulation. It's a conversion using all of the original materials and almost certainly some of the original wave code and such like, but it's rewritten from the ground up. So it isn't the original version, but it kind of is. It's a weird, I can't think of that many games that have been done in this manner that haven't had like a sort of like a graphical remake or anything like that. This game is basically, it's like the finest version that you'll see of the R-Type games, of the original R-Type games. Everything's a little beefed up, excuse me. It moves a little faster. And it's really, really challenging, and it will remind you just how challenging but also how fair these games are. I was talking to a friend recently who's not really familiar with the R-Type games, and I hate to do this, but I kind of liken them to Dark Souls, and you know, kind of like the Dark Souls of sort of space shmups, shoot 'em ups. I don't like that term either. I shouldn't have used that. I have to quit on using terms that I don't like. I like shoot 'em up rather than shmup. Like, there's so many pointless contractions in humanity nowadays. I think it pays well not to play into them. But wow, I forgot that he launched those little pods out at you. But as you can see, I mean, it's so fast, it's so fair. It just works great. It looks really good. It plays good. There's zero slowdown whatsoever. And I really think this is the finest version. And if you have emulation, then I ought to make another video detailing my emulation settings on DuckStation, because you can, of course, play without all this frame, without all the changes to CRT effects, but I love them. I think it makes it look much more historically accurate. This is like a tough boss. Those things on the outside start to close in, but these are the best versions. If you're rich, you can get them for the PS1, or you can just play them by emulation. That's R-Types on the PS1. It's fantastic. It's the best versions of the arcade you can get. Again, you know, I just wanted to let that play out. It's a little like, you know, some people, you know, they'll go to like a sauna or something like that, or a spa or a wellness retreat. I just put that PlayStation intro on and shut my eyes and kick back. And, you know, it transports me back to a more carefree time. It's strange how games can do that, and it's strange, and it is wonderful, I think. This is R-Type Delta, talking of wonderful. And I think this is probably, for me, this is possibly the greatest R-Type game. And it's strange to say that, because I really like the 2D graphics. I'm not a big fan of converting old 2D games into 3 dimensions. I feel that it often doesn't work. But this is a game where you can kind of almost switch off and ignore the fact it's in 3D, aside from it pulling loads of cool tricks. It pulls a lot of cool tricks as it spins around the levels and such like. But this is a really challenging, really well-made blaster. And it has some great additions to it, namely the dose in the bottom left. The more you hit other craft with the force on the front, and the more shots you absorb, the higher the dose meter will go. And when the dose meter reaches full, then you can do like a super destructive attack. And like literally, this game is really, really well planned out. It's like the roads. I go back to talking about Outrun 2006. It's like the roads in that game where you wonder why the other traffic is often in a similar place. There's only a few loadouts of where the traffic can actually be, but there's a reason. It's because you're meant to be slipstreaming all of it. It's there for the experts once you're actually really getting into the game, so you can improve your score and time and such like. But I've unlocked the top level dose now. Now what I do is I put this on the back. Not seen that much in these playthroughs. I put the force on the back, and then when I come to the front section of this ship, I let the dose off, which basically destroys it. Otherwise, that's quite a thing to contend with. It's quite the nuisance. But the dose made another appearance in R-Type Final. And it's really, really useful in that game also. But this game just feels better designed. And this game also feels closer to the originals. I felt R-Type Final has a really clinical, inorganic kind of feel to it. I think it's just the graphics and the sort of lack of exciting music. I think that's one thing they really missed going forward. R-Type was always exciting. Like, the music in R-Type Final, it's not that great. And the music in R-Type Final 2 is just flat out bad. It's not good at all. It's completely uninspiring. It's more like they've gone for like a kind of like an ambient soundscape or something, which, you know, I don't have a problem with that, but in a sort of high-paced shoot 'em up kind of game, then I think, yeah, it's a real problem. It really, really screws with the atmosphere, which you don't want to do in a game like this. It's one of the things that, you know, it's important to people who play R-Type. There we go, like super building the... super building up the dose again there. And I believe it's probably going to be pretty full by the time we get to this boss at the end, which is a cool boss. This game is cool throughout. There's nothing about this game that I don't think is done well. I think it's excellent, and I do genuinely think this is possibly the best R-Type game of all time, which is a strange thing to say, as I said. I mean, it's got a lot going against it with the new sort of play editions. Oh, right, as well, I forgot to mention the speed. You can see, as we had an image fight, you can see there's a speed option in this game where you can speed up and slow down, which is very like Image Fight. There is no speed option in this game. You just control the speed yourself. So that comes from like a really old game. So it's not only forward-looking, it's reverential of the past. And I think that's the best. But anyway, there's more to look at in this series. Alright, I've had a lot of crashes trying to get back into this. It's been kind of ridiculous. This system is really creaking under the weight of a 2.5 hour R-Type video, but this is R-Type DX, and this is on the Game Boy Color, and it's once again, for the handheld version, it's once again developed by Bits Studios from the UK. And it offers you, there's like 5 games in this technically. It's got R-Type DX, which is like a remix version that mixes levels and characters and enemies and such like from the first 2 R-Type games. It's really well done, as you can see. That's what I'm playing now. It's obviously, this is the first level from the original R-Type, more or less. And you also, in the cartridge, get R-Type 1 and 2 for the Game Boy, and you also get colorized versions of those games for the Game Boy Color. So it's really good value. I think this is probably quite a sought-after cart. Maybe not quite as sought after as the originals. And you can see there, as I flew along the bottom, collision detection is absolutely on point in this game. It's really important. People are like, why does he keep talking about that? But it's really important in R-Type that collision detection is not box-based and it's like pixel-based, so that you can really go smoothly around shots and such like. There are versions, obviously, of the game where that's not the case, and, you know, it suffers greatly. This thing's obviously some less orbs moving around, but it's managed to do what the Commodore 64 could not in terms of it moving around. But yeah, this is hold on, I don't know if you guys could hear that. There's like someone banging on my door. That's weird. I live, like I probably said, I live in the middle of nowhere, so I'm not sure what that's about. Like, there's no one comes up here. And, well, there's like a store down at the base of the creek on like the main road, but nobody comes up here unless they actually have to, so that's weird. But if it's anyone who has to, then I guess they'll understand. Sometimes it takes me about 20 minutes or so to actually get to the door. Not that I have a big house, I'm just really lazy and I sleep a lot. I'll leave that, they might bang again. And now, yeah, it's the same boss, obviously, that you would see. I'm not sure on the boss's names. It's like Dodge Caratops or something like that. I don't know the full ins and outs of the R-Type universe. I just love to play the games. It's the same in a lot of cases. I like to play the games. I'm not necessarily... Oh yeah, I forgot. When I put this under here, I couldn't get it back. I was pressing the button to get it back, and it wouldn't come back. It's kind of weird. It just got stuck down there. There was no way to actually get it back. As you can see, I go to it, it doesn't reattach. So that's like, it happens a lot with old games where they can't do updates to fix bugs. So now I got to attack the monkey. I don't want the organ grinder here. I want the monkey in the chest. So I take him out. This is a great version. I think if you want a good handheld version, it's probably one of the best of the classics. Alright, now here's a surprise from the data banks, and it's R-Type, but it's on a mobile phone. These pad sounds remind me a little bit of George Harrison's more self-indulgent moments, and the in-game music also has a sort of almost like a Clanad or Clanad or Clanad. I'm not sure how to pronounce the name of that group. The group that Enya used to be in before she went solo with the Orinoco Flow, which is apparently a song about menstruation. But yeah, it's a fantastic port. It's really strange. One would not imagine that a mobile phone from 2002 would be able to rip such a great R-Type port, but this is very good. The graphics are very arcade accurate. The only unfortunate thing is that, like the older ST versions, there's no actual sound when you're playing the game. And that guy that pops into the back there, you can see it's like it's emulating the full play area. Or at least it's trying to, but you're not necessarily able to access it. So you just have to access what it throws at you. And here, obviously, the background fade in effect didn't work, so they had to just do like a graphical dither, but that's cool. I'm happy with that. I never knew this existed. If I'd known this had existed, well, I don't really believe in mobile phones. Like, I know they exist, but you know, I don't really like to use them. I find them very invasive in my life, and a lot of people would bother me. I had a mobile phone actually around this time, but it was just like a little brick phone kind of thing. As a green screen, it certainly would not have been emulating R-Type, but this is a great version, you know. I think it probably lived or died based on how the control functionality was for your individual phone. I mean, the S60 line, I looked into this, there are a lot of different S60 phones. I initially thought this must have been for Nokia's N-Gage, but it was not. It was for just all these series of phones. There's probably about 50 phones that you could actually play this game on, so that's kind of interesting and pretty cool. But I managed to play this on the BlueStack simulator, which obviously emulates old mobile phones as well as newer Android phones, which was pretty cool. I didn't realize that. I was trying to jump through about 500 different hoops to install Java and all these programming platforms in order to get this goddamn thing to work, and then yeah, I just could run it really easily using BlueStacks, so that was cool. This is actually, I think it's pretty good. If you have an old phone of that era kicking around, it's worth a play. Those screens are scrappy, but the actual game, it's pretty good. Right, now here we are, folks, at arguably what was certainly supposed to be the end of the line for the R-Type series. This is R-Type Final, and as you can see from the sidebar, this was on the PlayStation 2, the PS2, and I like it, but I think you need to play it quite a lot to get the best out of it. This first level is not going to necessarily show you everything that you need to know about the game. It's one of those games where the more you play it, the more you unlock, and the more options become available to you. It's got a cool intro. It's much nicer than, for example, the R-Types or the R-Type Delta intro. But that guy needs to work on his driving. If he's trying to protect humans, he should not be engaging in behaviors that could result in him crashing into them. This bit kind of reminds me of like a Resident Evil or something like that. It was all the rage in those days, trying to do like biological style graphics, or Petri dish. It's festering in the Petri dish boss, and then somebody turns into a vampire and you have to kill them at point blank range with a shotgun. It's that kind of a thing. But yeah, I mean, this game was supposed to be the last in the line, and for what it is, I do think it's kind of cool, but I think it suffers from a lot of like PS2-itis, where I think the graphics look kind of drab. There's all the ships. You can see like probably Mr. Heli will pop up there at some point. Little orange, there he is, little orange guy. Mr. Heli also reminded me a lot of Blood Money on the Amiga. It was probably supposed to. And in there somewhere you would have seen the ship from the Gallop game as well, and several other. The Image Fight ship would have been in there. This is the game that collected basically everything from the R-Type history together. So, as we start into the first level, the speed is the same as Delta and as in Image Fight, where you can control it. It has these odd little, they're not haikus, but these odd little Japanese poems before the start of each level. Now the graphics are nice, don't get me wrong, but I just think they're a little gray. Everything's a little gray, and the explosions and the ferocity of the gameplay could be amped up a bit. It feels, I don't know, I don't mean this in a negative way, but I don't mean necessarily in a positive way. It feels more like an art project or something. It's like to show off what the PS2 can do, but also someone with a very definite artistic vision, which is no bad thing. But it just doesn't, to me, feel particularly like R-Type, which of course an R-Type game should. I like the slam when that hits into that guy. I like the fact you're having this sort of slamathon with him. And you also have the dose meter is back as well, as you can see in the bottom left, for building up, for crashing into enemies and such like, in order to release like a huge smart bomb. Oh, by the way, it was the mailman that was at my door, just for those of you who are interested in the ongoing soap opera non-event that is my life. I ordered some parts for my guitar from China, and they arrived, so that was that. But yeah, I always avoid the sort of wall creepers. I never really enjoy using them particularly much. I think they're good for certain enemies, but ultimately it's nothing that you can't cover with the blue bouncing beam. Now it's like a giant sort of land crab thing. It owes a lot more, I think, to more modern kind of Japanese manga, as opposed to the other games, which kind of stand on their own. I wouldn't have said they're particularly manga influenced, but this feels much more like a more modern Japanese take, with all the cultural awareness that goes with it coming alongside. Now this guy's kind of irritating. You have to make your way through and get the force off round behind you so you can attack him with that. But it's cool because it's like it's forcing you to do things that you wouldn't necessarily have to do in a lot of the other games. I think, having the force on the back, in like the first R-Type game, it's like you know, it's not that useful really necessarily. It's kind of useful when you're on level 3, but you don't have to use it on the back. But this game really forces you to flip it around more. The backgrounds moving are a little vomit-inducing. I'm not sure why they move around so much. You could see me, I jumped the speed up to 4 there, so I could get a little bit more maneuverability. I like the fact that you control the speed yourself. I think that's necessary in the R-Type series because often when you restart at a checkpoint, you're like really slow and there's not really any need for that level of, or that loss of speed. And the game really works against you. It almost reminds me of like a Laserdisc style background. I move from side to side to avoid those lasers, but I don't believe they can actually hit you. It's just for graphical effect. But yeah, it almost feels like one of those old Sega background Laserdisc style games where the game's overlaid on a background that you can't interact with and it's, you know, out with what you're actually doing, which is kind of a shame because in R-Type you're usually avoiding the background and such like. So it's hard to know in this game where you're going to encounter or where you have to avoid hitting into something. But yeah, it's the end of level 1 boss. It's kind of a bit of a visual non-event, but this is a good game. But I think if you want to play a polygonal R-Type game, Delta is definitely the one. I mean, in terms of shoot-em-ups, that's probably one of the greatest shoot-em-ups. Not of the R-Type series, but like of all time. It's really, really great, and I recommend playing it and getting into it. It's frustrating, but it really rewards repeated play. This is a good game, final, but yeah, I don't know. It was going out with more of a whimper than a bang, unfortunately. Right, well, here we are. It's more deja vu in a video that's basically filled with deja vu. And it's R-Type 3, but this time we're on the Game Boy Advance. And this game's flaws are starting to be more exposed as we head to Nintendo's, in this case, little platform that could not, unfortunately. And the main thing you're going to hear about this, or in this, is that the music is like far inferior. Have a listen. I remember like when MTV would still play music and there was like the Dance Zone or whatever, if it just happened to be on like at a friend's when we were doing bongs or something like that. Not that we wanted to listen to it, but there was like nothing else to put on. We'd be like waiting for, I can't even remember, was it Alternative Nation or MTV Raps or something like that? We'd have to listen to this sort of stuff, but it's like these kind of pad noises remind me a lot of all that kind of, I don't know, it's not like techno, but like disco sort of stuff that you would hear at the time. It really sucked anyway, and now I have to listen to it while I'm playing R-Type, which is very disheartening. Yeah, the music really fails in this version. I'm not sure why they felt the need to do that, if there was something about being unable to convert the original music from R-Type 3, the Third Lightning, from the SNES version, or there was some other reason as to why they did this, but I really, really don't like the music in this game. It also crackles a lot. I'm not sure if they did that on the original. I think that's probably more likely the fact that I'm playing it on emulation, and GBA emulation for some reason is not crash hot, which is kind of strange. You would think it would be at this day and age, but I don't know. If you have the original of this for the Game Boy Advance, let me know. Is the sound really bad when you're playing it normally? I mean, I know the music's bad, but does it glitch? Are there like little glitches, audio glitches? I put the buffer up full, but yeah, I still seem to be getting pretty bad glitches. But thankfully for all you guys out there, I'm talking over it. Well, I don't know, it's a blessing or a curse, one way or the other. But you don't have to listen to the constant crackling. You just have to listen to my wonderfully dulcet tones. But yeah, I think this is a poor version. There's quite a bit of slowdown on some of the levels in the game. And it loses, that's one thing I forgot completely to mention, because I'm usually on more or less a solo mission in my life nowadays. A lot of my friends have gone on to become functional, productive members of society, of families and such like, whereas, you know, I just like my guitar and my video games and going for walks in the forest. That's pretty much my life. I don't know, people have said I'm like a benign version of the Unabomber. I'll take that. But, you know, there's no two-player mode in this game. It's gone. There was a two-player mode in the original R-Type 3, which is one of the saving graces of the game, if I'm being totally honest. It's really good. It works well, but that's been completely gutted for the Game Boy Advance. Now, I believe the Game Boy Advance did have a link cable, so it's not like, well, it's not out with the realm of possibilities that they could have put that into it. I'm also, I don't know if you have noticed, I'm making inroads into enunciation in this video. I'm trying to enunciate better. It's like whenever I see my mom, which is like super rare nowadays, she's always like, Deacon, you're mumbling again. Yeah, it's just a mumbling noise. You speak to my partner with respect and, you know, all that sort of stuff. But yeah, I'm trying for the international viewers who don't perhaps understand my particular dialect. I'm trying to, well, be more, how would you say, be more listenable. It's easier to understand what I'm talking about. I've just been on the beam in this as well. I've not moved. I think the other says hyper or something like that when you shift out of the beam. This version does not have self-controlled speed. You still have to pick up the speed pods from dropping the enemies, which is kind of a shame. I really like those. I think that's a good part of the later R-types. It's definitely one of the things that works better in all of those games, even though from Final onwards there seem to be more negatives than positives. But yeah, just this relentlessly bad music. You can see most of the game is here. Like from the original SNES version, it's here. And you face the same challenges. It's not, I don't know, it's not a bad conversion. It's just there's something missing from it. There's definitely something missing, and the gameplay is a little different. You can see this tunnel's like now super fat, and if you were at the sides there, you would be dead. Like look, when it's at the bottom now, you would be off screen, so your ship would be destroyed. That's not the same on the original SNES version. So there are differences in how these levels are put together, even though, like, you know, visually they look very similar. There we go, it's hyper, that's the one. And then you get all these like crazy blasts that you can do. And that doesn't even sound as good. On the SNES version, these bits that are firing now, when you're firing those, it sounds like someone like whipping a pillow with a cane or something. I really like that noise. It's strangely comforting, like feet crunching through snow or something like that. Like it's, I don't know, there's something that I like a lot about that noise on the original. Oh my god, I've got like the worst headache, folks. I got like the worst headache right behind my eyes. I'm just sitting really badly. I need to buy a better chair. I just sit in the wood chair while I'm doing this stuff, and I've played days of R-Type and done all these sidebars and such. Like, this has been a real effort, this video, so I hope people are enjoying it. As I said, I wanted to make the most complete R-Type video for YouTube and just cover as much as I could, or everything I could, of the shoot 'em up side of the series. And I think I've done that. I don't think, you can put in the comments if I've missed any, but I really don't think I've missed any versions of this game, or the sequel, or any of the R-Type lineage. I think it's all here. But yeah, this thing in the middle is a little smaller, the rotating thing, than it is in the original SNES version, but it's there, you know, it's there. But I think it's all the fact it's just underpinned by this ridiculous music. You get that, though, in a lot of games where it's like the PC Engine CD version. They obviously thought they were doing the game a favor by putting in that really bad music. When obviously, as a fan of the game... Sorry, I'm just like massaging my eyes at the moment. Yeah, that was bad. I need to take, like... I took some paracetamol not that long ago, but I need to take, I don't know, like Nurofen or something like that. Yeah, where was I? Yeah, the sound. I mean, they obviously thought they were doing the game a favor in R-Type on the PC Engine, the PC CD, R-Type Complete, but it didn't. I think, you know, the music's cool. But is it better than the original music? Probably not. In this case, the music's bad. Is it better than the original? Definitely not. It's like really, really bad. Hey, here comes the boss. That noise, as well as the weapons cooling down, is like kind of irritating. And this little orb swinging around. I'm not sure. I think that's related to the heat. As soon as the heat up goes down, the orb goes back to normal. But yeah. Would I recommend this version of the game? Not really. I like, you know, there's many better versions of R-Type. And like, you know, I probably wouldn't recommend many of the Nintendo versions at all, if I'm being honest. There are better versions with, as I've said, the ultimate versions do come for the PS1. I think they're so incredible. They're so well done, and they're absolutely perfect, and they're presided over by the original people. They're not like conversions as such. It's just like a complete remake using like the game logic, and it's not a reskin. It's not like a Demon's Souls PS5 kind of thing where the old game sits on top of just like a basic reskin. Sure, it looks nice, but it's window dressing on top of a pretty clunky aged game. No, they've really, really gone above and beyond to make the new R-Type look excellent on the R-Type's version. But yeah, I would avoid this one. Game Boy Advance, I would stay well clear. Right, so here we land on the doorstep of R-Type Dimensions. This is on a lot of systems. I think it was 360 in 2009, then with PS3, PS4, Switch, and Steam following on later. Is it a bad version of the game? Not at all. It looks nice. You can switch back to the original, like at the touch of a button as well. But I really don't like this arranged music in like the 3D versions. I believe, apparently, I didn't actually get the chance to check it, but the original Xbox version supposedly has like the original music, which I think is better. So maybe owners of that can tell me in the comments. I was unable to emulate it, and it's just a lot of trouble wiring up my Xbox. It's on its last legs. So I've done the Switch version here and playing, and it's cool. You can switch between this version and like the old arcade version, a little like Wonder Boy in the Dragon's Trap, I think that one is, where you can jump around. It's good. I mean, this is a good version of the game. It's great, in fact. But does it beat R-Types? Personally, I don't think so. I think R-Types is still the most wonderful version. That's like a cool bit there. I think that shot hit the back of the force on the top, so it just avoided killing me. I was wondering what that was when I played it. It was like, wow, that was like really lucky. But again, good collision detection. It's important, and there are versions of R-Type where the collision detection is not so good. Like I've talked about it a lot, but I like when those arms close in Pulstar. It's like Pulstar has some nice nice moments in it where it's like, you wanted this to happen in R-Type, right? Okay, it's gonna happen here and now. You get ready, buddy. And yeah, it's pretty cool. I like the light refracting off the back walls here. I think that looks really nice as well. The colors are great. They've gone away from the R-Type Final colors. Also, so much for R-Type Final. I think R-Type Final was like, I think it was 2002 or something like that. But then we have this game coming like a long time after. I just plunged that force in there. Takes him right out. Oh, I thought it took him right out. I'm sure I managed to kill him. It'll be with a force blast or something. Yeah, there we go. But yeah, it's a good version. We're going to look at R-Type 2 from that collection also. So I guess this is R-Type Dimensions EX, which I believe is like the Switch and PS4 and Steam versions of the game. But again, this music, it's like, yeah, it kind of sucks. But the games, nice, they look nice, but they look a little, I don't know, for me, they look a little mobile phony. And I don't mean, well, I guess I do. It's not intended to be play on words, but I suppose it kind of is, because it's like they are echoing the original, but they're not the original. So I guess they are kind of phony. But they look like the sort of thing that a graphics artist would do, where they're like, yeah, I can change this up. I'm gonna switch this up and make it like a lot better and modernize it. It's just not necessary. Those of us who grew up with these games, we don't necessarily want that. We just want the original game. Maybe have something like, you know, like a cheat menu or like some bonus menu where you can unlock maybe different craft colors, or if you want to play with invulnerability, like invulnerability. Invulnerability, I think, is overrated in these games. It's all about the skill and actually getting through. If you want to get through and you're just invulnerable all the time, then you're going to get through. So, you know, you lose the game. The whole game of R-Type is learning the waves and getting the satisfaction from getting through what's a pretty ridiculously over-the-top odds against you and still managing to triumph. That's, for me, that's the fun of R-Type. But if you remove that, then what do you have? You know, it's just like a well, I would say it's not a walking simulator, it's a flying simulator. Well, it's not even a simulator. Shoot 'em up simulator, where you've got the guide rails on. I like that alien when he turned around as well. That was really cool then. But here comes this interesting boss. I'll try and get that one shot. The one superpower shot, if you land that, that's game over for him. This is a good series of titles. If you can get hold of it, I recommend it. But I would still say for the ultimate R-Type 1 and 2 experience, it's R-Types on the PS1. I'm not changing my opinion on that. So, this is something kind of different. This is Flash in the Void of Space, or Flash of the Void, or Spark in the Void. It's got a lot of different names. Presumably it's just a translation from Japanese. This was never actually released in the West. This was part of IRM's home space, or one of their home spaces for PlayStation 3 Home, which now no longer exists. And I have to doff my cap to the excellent people behind the RPCS3 emulator, who made this all available to us, the world. And this shows, it's a little view into what heinous gaming crime could have taken place if R-Type had ever been in 3D, and it doesn't really work. But it's interesting, and I see games like this. You know, I think Star Fox, I think all these like Freelancer and all those sort of games, Tachyon Void, and just immediately think, wow, you know, I gotta play this because I love games in that sort of style. But then, I play it and it really sucks and there's nothing to do, but it was basically for the home space. You've got to destroy 10,000 points worth of these ships, which is really easy. You just power up and blast them. When the screen goes all white like that, it's just one of those ships exploding. I've already got 5,500. And if you get 10,000 points, then you unlock, I believe, an item for the PlayStation Home or some kind of badge or something, some badge of honor or something like that. But it's pointless because there's no one nowadays to display such a badge to. Or maybe there is on the simulated PlayStation Home. I'm not sure if you can play that with others or not. I would imagine, in fact, you probably can. But yeah, there I've got the 10,000 points. That's complete. So yeah, that's Flash in the Void of Space, or Spark in the Void, or Flash of the Void, or whatever. You get to also walk around the hangar around the R9 ship, which is kind of cool. And there's a couple of parts where it says, come back later, will be implemented later, but I don't think they ever did implement anything. In fact, I believe our IRM actually removed their home environments from PlayStation Home before PlayStation Home itself was taken down, so I don't know. Obviously, some form of trouble there led them to doing that. But it's an interesting curiosity, and it's a shooting game, so I said I was going to include all shooting games. So there we are. That's Flash of the Void. All in Japanese, but it's kind of fun as a curiosity, but nothing more. So now we have the Android and iOS versions of R-Type, which are kind of like a touchscreen nightmare. R-Type was never obviously designed to be played with touchscreen controls, and as far as I'm concerned, most games, unless it's like Mahjong or some kind of strategy game, they don't benefit from them really. And I've also squashed this down a little bit because it was stretched in the widescreen, the actual game, so you can see the buttons to play the game are kind of look squashed, but that's because people would say, oh, it's like a widescreen version of the game, but it's not, it's like, it's just been stretched. Like they do that a lot with these older games, and people are like, oh, it's like a full screen version. It's not a full screen version, it's just 4:3 that's been stretched. So the game looks normal, but the controllers look a little weird. But I'd rather have that than the game looking weird and the controllers looking normal. But as you can see, this is a pretty good version of the game. It's pretty arcade accurate. The graphics are as you would expect. The sound is as you would expect. It has auto fire as well, because you don't want to just hammer on and on and on and on and on the screen of your mobile phone. That doesn't make much sense. It would also be really annoying to, I don't know, if you were riding a bus or something like that and you're just sitting behind people and it's just tap, tap, tap. I would definitely get really annoyed by that. So yeah, that's kind of a saving grace of the game. I found some difficulty with emulating this on the BlueStacks emulator, but I got there in the end. More with the second version where it was giving me phantom inputs on the controls. But if you want to play the original R-Type, then basically the arcade via an emulator is the way to go on a home PC or in a handheld or something. I wouldn't waste your time on the Android versions necessarily. I imagine the controls are a little too clunky for playing this game with any degree of accuracy. It even has an option for touch controls where it's like a mouse and you touch on the screen and the ship goes there. I can only imagine that being a complete nightmare when it comes to playing the later levels, or even when it came to playing this level. I deemed it unworthy completely, but some people like to play like that, I guess. Some people like the challenge. But yeah, I mean, if you want this game, I think it's R-Type on the arcade, or R-Type 2, or ultimately, you want to go for R-Types on the PS1. That's still, I'm not changing my mind, that's still the standout version. And here's R-Type 2. So you just tap on the play button. I tried this a lot of times. I had a lot of trouble with this game for some reason with regards to the movement and defining the movement, because you can override the movement with like a joypad or whatever, but you have to map it in BlueStacks, which is an Android emulator. And yeah, I wasn't really happy about it. It seemed to be causing a lot of phantom inputs where the ship would just pull away randomly, so I'm kind of fighting against them as I play it, but I was damn set on actually finishing the game, or finishing the level so you could all see it. But yeah, it's got the same like frantic tunes, the same wild sound that the original had. I mean, it's basically the original running emulated on a phone. And for that, I mean, when you look at the 2002 version, which is still cool, you know, I still think that's really good for a phone version. But when you look at that versus this, I mean, this is clearly the arcade version. Everything's here, it's running really smoothly, there's no slowdown. I mean, there's no slowdown in most of these old emulated games on an Android or an iPhone these days. There should not be. I mean, they're very advanced pieces of technology. I mean, what the public wants, the public gets nowadays. And I don't particularly want to get into talking about my beliefs with regards to certain conspiracies and such like, but obviously, I mean, it's no conspiracy to say that all this tech is mostly driven by Army tech, and that what the Army has will soon filter down to the rest of us, because it's, I forget the name, there's a term for like a cross usage where something is designed for one thing, and anyway, I don't really want to get into talking about that. So yeah, I like the noise of the ding ding of that laser as well. It's really cool when it bounces around the levels. This has been R-Type 2 on Android, and aside from the finicky controls, I wish they would let you play with the joypad. I don't think they do on an actual Android phone, but those are good versions if it's not for the ruinous control system, which I don't have much time for. Right, so here we go, R-Type Final 2. It does have an introduction, so I'm going to let you all listen to that instead of talking over the top of it.
Once upon a time, humanity was on the brink of destruction. By the invasion of alien organisms from outer space. People pinned their last hope on a small trans-dimensional fighter. Hi, how's it going? Now, you are about to go into the start sequence. The start sequence has been completed. Are you ready to take off? Good luck.
Right, you can see there's all these different courses and levels that you can have. There's all kinds of different ships that can be unlocked. This is a strange game. It starts out really, really boring, and the later you get into the game itself, the more it becomes like an actual R-Type game, and the more the challenge starts to ramp up, and the memory game kicks in. And I think it is not a bad game. It's better than the first Final. But on the other hand, is it necessary? Does it really bring anything else that makes it better than the older classics? Certainly than R-Type Delta? No, it's not as good as R-Type Delta. Nowhere near. Another thing that puzzles me about this game is the completely impotent soundtrack. It's really poor. I love the lighting though. I do love the lighting when you store up the Pulse Blast. You know, it's pretty nice to see that. But the graphics are quite busy, the backgrounds and such like. It's sometimes hard to see if you're being shot at, which is kind of like a trade-off they have to go for in these games. It's not always the easiest thing to implement. But on the whole, I just feel like this game is kind of unnecessary. It's also an unnecessary attack on your finances. Like, you know, believe it or not, this game actually costs about, I think if I were to buy everything, it's about $200 or something like that. $250 to get all of the downloaded content. And that is, you know, that's kind of like that's on a par with something like Dead or Alive, which is widely being regarded as the most egregious DLC wagon that you could come across in the gaming sphere. Like, this is as bad, if not worse. Charging such a vast amount of money for ships and older levels, older classic levels. The team might argue you don't need to buy them, but then this game was funded on Kickstarter, and I don't believe, correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I don't believe this game came with everything for the Kickstarter backers, so they're still being squeezed even after they've actually funded the game. This is an interesting point on this. Like, this guy, he does not feature on any of the other level ones. It's just like the little homunculus from his chest that features. The monkey, as I call him, is not the organ grinder, being the head. Yeah, it's actually on all the other difficulties. I'm playing this on the top difficulty. On all the other difficulties, he is encased in ice, this large monster. But it's just kind of boring, this, because you have this, I don't know if it's a bug or if it's intentionally designed. Often there are these little places where you can go for a little respite in the R-Type games, but it's like these stupid lasers never come down there. These would be really hard to avoid, I think, if you were flying around normally, actually trying to avoid them. Very difficult indeed. But no, you can just sit down the bottom here. It's absolutely fine. None of them will ever touch you. But it's kind of boring. It's just like lunk-headed power laser work to get rid of this guy. But yeah, you get a lot of levels into this. It starts to open up and become pretty cool, but can you put the time in? And the music is so lame. Like, there's no action or a good vibe to it at all. It just sounds really, really flat and really wet, really weak, almost completely ambient at points on certain levels. There's a lot of things wrong with this game. The death animation is effectively non-existent as well. As soon as you get hit, it just stops the game, like totally pauses it, and then will restart. It's really weird. There's a lot of strange design choices here that I'm not a massive fan of. But that's R-Type Final 2. There is a Final 3, but it's just more of an add-on for this game, allegedly. And I don't have a PS5, nor will I be obtaining one, so the likelihood of me playing that game is pretty low. You can see this guy takes a lot. I mean, if you were flying around avoiding this stuff, that's a lot, you know, that's a lot. You know, it's a lot to ask of players, definitely. It would be really hard. You might think, oh, it's impossible, but I just found this little spot to hang in. But yeah, R-Type Final 2, does it bring anything worthwhile to the table? I would say probably not. As a huge fan of the series, I'd say no. Alright, well, that's our journey into R-Type, or at least the official version's kinda complete. There's one missing that some of you may be hollering at your screens, talking about or screaming about, but I don't have a PS5 and I will not be buying a PS5, so I cannot cover R-Type Final 3. Which is an odd one in itself, as the game was promised to backers of the Kickstarter for R-Type Final 2 as releasing on all the systems that R-Type Final 2 was set to support, but at the end it has only so far released for the PlayStation 5, which is a console I have very little interest in owning. I'd like to play Demon's Souls, but I believe it'll come to PC sooner or later. And I'd also like to play Spider-Man 2, but that's a whole different kettle of wasps, as it's currently been released on the PC recently and is apparently a really, really poor port. So I might tackle that a few months down the line, but we're not at the end of our R-Type journey just yet, as there are a few historical wrongs that real stand-up members of the homebrew community obviously decided they wanted to rectify. So we're gonna take a look at a few of them, or all of the ones I could find right now. If there's more, please let me know in the comments and I can take a look at them. But these are the real standouts that I was able to locate, and I raise my cap to everyone involved in these. I was really, I mean, I'm a little disparaging of the ST version due to the speed, but I've been really impressed by all of these, and the fact that it's a labor of love from members of the community, and they've done really well. So anyway, let's have a look at the community remakes of R-Type. Alright, so the first one we're going to dive into is the Amstrad version, which I think is kind of the one that needs redeemed the most from the original game. And you know, this is a good version. And you have like the music, you've got sound over it. I love that sound as the enemies die as well. It sounds like it sounds like a mouse smashing like a tiny glass, like in anger or something. It's like, you will give me that cheese. No. Alright then, feel my wrath. And then, you know, he throws down like proper. But yeah, this is what the Amstrad should have got in the first place, and it shows that, you know, it could basically be arguably the best of the home 8-bit versions, I think. I mean, this is really impressive, and it's all the more so that it's a homebrew team. I mean, these are all, the upcoming pieces are all from homebrew teams, and you know, it's amazing that we have these people in the community. They're so capable, and they produce such great titles, and we really are lucky to have them. So the people who did this, I really take my hats off to you. And this simple, the way the background fades in here as well, it's really well done. Really well done. And I definitely, if I'd seen this when I was younger, even as a Commodore owner, I would have been super jealous, because I think this is finer than the Commodore version also. I'm sure people out there would disagree, but I mean, this is arcade accurate, whereas the Commodore version is Well, it's really not. There's a lot of stuff from the Commodore version that's not arcade accurate at all. It's a good game. It's got a great soundtrack. It's obviously R-Type. But, you know, on the other hand, it kind of sucks in some ways. It's really fast. That's one thing I would say the Commodore version definitely has in its corner. It's really fast. And the excellent soundtrack. And when you put it up against, I hadn't really spent much time with the Amstrad or like any time with the Amstrad or the ZX Spectrum versions. Or the ZX Spectrum, I would say, if I'm looking to catch the ire of the British in the comments section. But yeah, I think the Commodore version it's hard to argue that it's not better than those, even though it's not, like, obviously going for the same arcade perfect vibe as the Spectrum with the waves and such like. It's really good. It's really well done. But then you see something like this, and not only looks really good, it's smooth, it's fast, and it's basically covering the bases that none of those versions previously did. It's really ticking all the boxes. And I think it's such a shame that, I forget the guy's name, was it Goodyear, was not able to do what he maintained he was able to do, and he had this 21 days period to just do basically a bad portion of, or a bad port rather, of the ZX Spectrum version, which, you know, nobody deserved that, I don't think. And here we go with the end of level boss, which moves really good. It's smooth. They've got the music. Everything's happening here. It's excellently done. I was super impressed by this when I played this because I don't know the Amstrad as a system. And I was just going on what I'd seen of the previous version, and then I saw this and I was like, wow, you know what? You know, this computer can do it. You know, they just didn't give it the time. It didn't have enough time to cook in the oven. But that's really worth checking out. You can see a link to it, a QR code to click in the sidebar to get hold of it. So up next in this chapter of Righting Wrongs, we have a really good Atari ST port that has its foibles, but ultimately I think, you know, this offers a lot more than the original. Now, I'm not sure, I can't remember fully. I'll know after a certain point. I think I'm playing this, it's on the Mega STE, so it's not running on the standard ST, and I'm pretty sure I'm playing it with the processor doubled, so like the processor timings are doubled, so the game is basically running faster. Now, unfortunately, you can still see that the game is quite slow, but I think that could be remedied by optimizing the code or such like. I'm not sure if the people are still working on this. I would hope they are. I mean, this is really smooth. This is looking like how it should. And even this section of the music. It's actually providing something different. Even the music itself has been like upgraded and changed and goes in a slightly different direction, which is cool. Really nice to hear someone's put in some work in that. So it's not just a game, it's like the music's had a little overhaul too. But sections like this are wonderful when there's not much on screen. It's running really good. But then, particularly when you get this weapon that's just coming up, I found the game slowed down. Like, you know, I would say it's pretty much too much. I think probably this is the actual STE version without the speed up on the, I hope, without the speed up involved. I'm not sure. I do remember even with the speed up, with the megahertz boost, it was still running pretty slow, like when there was a lot of stuff on screen. Oh, I forgot that I missed that. But ultimately, this is a very good version of the game. And it shows what could be possible with the ST. If they toned some things down or dropped some things back a little, I'm sure they could have got it to move a little bit faster. I mean, this is like, it's either a small team or it's a single guy who's doing this, and you know, this is really impressive compared to what we had. You know, what we had on the ST was pretty miserable. Probably, as I said, like the worst of the 16-bit versions, so that's nice. It's good to see it like buffed up and something different done to it. Is it the best of the new versions? I would say personally I prefer the Amstrad version to this, just because of how much this actually does slow down. But it's unarguable that it looks lovely, it looks really nice. It's a great looking version of the game. It plays well also. The sound's great, you got the shooting sounds, all the main effects in the game are there. It's just, it's slow, you know, at points it's really, really slow, which is unfortunate. I was kind of, when I saw the graphics from it, I thought, right, you know, somebody got it right, somebody did something good on the ST for once, and then I found out it has to be an STE or a Mega ST with memory expansions and such like. It's not a base ST, far from it, that this is running on. But they have done a really good job. It's 2015, I see in the bottom right, actually. My eyes don't really work so great for reading these sidebars. I wrote these at a different time. I don't remember the contents of them. Probably I should have briefed myself before doing each video. But I just wanted to record and just speak my mind about what's happening. It takes a while for this the monkey to burst out of the stomach there. You just have the organ grinder. Oh, here he comes. He's coming out. I think he pops off pretty quickly here. And that's the way to deal with him. It's often the way to deal with a lot of stuff in the original R-Type, is just to use... I'm not trying to make a pun here, but to use the force, like, against them. It's your best weapon, basically. It's constantly dealing damage. So that's the ST remake. Now we go back to the 8-bit series with the Spectrum version. Which kind of, like, it's a while since I played the Spectrum version, and to be honest, like, this, it's pretty good. It's a little scrappy, but for me, this is actually a really good 8-bit version of the game. It's really nice. Is it on a par with the new Amstrad version? No, probably not, but all they've really added in this, it's still the same game. All they've really added is they've brought it to the +3 system, which apparently is like a disk-based ZX Spectrum system that's like 128K of RAM. So they've increased the RAM. Well, the programmers haven't, but they're using the increased RAM to store like music. And I believe as well, these sound effects are from one of the actual MSX versions, so they ported the sound over from the MSX for the AY, which is kind of cool. I'm not sure if the MSX used an AY chip. As I said, I'm not like I don't mean it offensively, I more mean it in a derogatory sense towards myself, because I don't pay much attention, but I'm not a nerd about stuff like that. Like, I don't know, well, the chips and stuff like that that's inside systems, you know? It's like, you know, I just like to play games, basically. I like the games. And coming from the ST version, you'll see, I mean, there's like, I don't understand why that has so much slowdown when it's such an inferior system as the Spectrum. I mean, again, I don't mean to offend anyone or fanboys, but ultimately, I think on paper everyone would say that the ZX Spectrum is technically inferior to an Atari ST, but yet it can run R-Type at a totally acceptable speed. From what I can tell throughout, I've played a few levels on it, and it slows down a little, but it's nowhere near as bad as the ST. I always found it kind of weird that the lasers, these lasers are like rainbow. I'm not really sure why that is. Not at all. And obviously, you know, you can see the graphics here. I mean, the Spectrum version does, or the Spectrum does have the ability to do that sort of light blue that would have been perfect for these lasers. So yeah, it's kind of weird to me why that's not just implemented as the default color for the lasers when it is in the arcade, and I think every other version really. But yeah, this is nice to have, like, the music. It's not that much different. There's actually been, from my learning and investigations, there have been a lot of ports of R-Type for the ZX Spectrum, or a lot of changes to this initial port that have been done by the community, rather. And they range from, I like paging the whole game into memory so they don't need to basically do the multi-load. That's one thing I didn't mention. This game's actually a multi-load, which means once the level's finished, you have to put the tape back in and reload another level, which kind of sucks, and you know, I wouldn't be a big fan of that. This version is the same, but obviously it loads from disk. That's nice. I would say that's probably the best version for the Spectrum with the music and such like. Right, now this is kind of the final version that we're going to go into. This is R-Type on the Megadrive, which oddly enough never got a version, and look at it. Listen to it. It's fantastic. Like, the sound is great, the graphics are great, the speed is great. The music's absolutely hammering. Like, I would say the music in this version is actually better than the original R-Type. So that's really quite something. They've done a lot of good in this version. It really paid a lot of attention. Everyone's firing on all cylinders. I love that bit of the music there. It's playing right now. It's like hammering like really hard. That's what R-Type should sound like. It should be like really chunky kind of sound and such like. But yeah, it's weird. This was on the Master System but never materialized on the Megadrive, and this just goes to show what it could have done. And this, you know, it's not finished. Unfortunately, it's not finished, but I think when it is finished, it may well be the finest conversion. Like, we still have, obviously, the R-Types for the PS1 being the most ultimate representations of the arcade version, but I think in some ways this eclipses even that. Certainly in terms of the music, which I absolutely love. I think they've done a great job on that, but you know, that's not to put down the work that's clearly been done on the programming, and everything about this is just excellent. I'm really, really impressed by it, but at the moment, it was 2023, this was actually released or unleashed upon the community. But I don't think there's been much progress since then, which is a shame. But there are 3 levels I believe you can play, and look at the speed of that tail, look how smooth it is. One of the levels is actually a secret level, or the secret level from the Sega Master System version, which is pretty cool. It's good to see that. That wasn't repeated anywhere else. It was just solely for that system. So it's a nice echo of that for 2 Sega consoles to have that same version. That's excellent. I really hope they finish it. Check out the link at the QR code on the top right if you want to download and play that for yourself. And with that final excellent Genesis version, I call it the Megadrive version because it's made by British coders, so I think it's nice to give them a bit of shine for that. And it was, of course, the Megadrive in Europe. But that brings us to the final end of this R-Type compilation. So many titles and so many different versions of what is arguably still an absolute classic, to the extent that people still talk about it, and hopefully people will watch this video and get as much enjoyment out of it as I took irritation from creating it, because it was not an easy video to create, and it's taken me a long time. It's taken me a lot longer than I initially imagined. I just kept discovering more versions and more versions as I went along, and I really did want to feature all of the versions possible. I think I've only missed out on the PlayStation 5 version of R-Type Final 3, but I think I'm just going to have to miss out on that one. According to rumors, it's not that great anyway. I think the fire really burned out on the series after R-Type Delta. I think that, for me, it's probably the peak. It took me a while to get used to the polygonal graphics, but I think the polygons look really good, and you know, if you run it like, you know, if it's on an emulator, it can look a lot better than it was originally intended to, with some nice CRT effects and such like. So I would say Delta's my favorite, even out of all of these, but there's some great versions I'd never tried before. Like, for example, the early 2000 mobile phone version. I think that's actually pretty good, and I was never aware of it. I think it'd be hard to play on that kind of control setup on a phone, but as a version, it's still pretty good. It's still got that kind of R-Type DNA, and I think, you know, like, as we go through all of these versions, I think that's something they all have. To a greater or lesser extent, they're all trying to preserve that DNA of R-Type that passes down through the years. It gets diluted, sure, and then eventually we wind up with stuff like the R-Type Finals, which I just don't think they're that great. I think that R-Type Final is like not a fitting send-off for the series at all. But we have R-Type Delta. They can never take R-Type Delta from us. And of course, before that, we have R-Types, both on the PlayStation, oddly enough, but Delta is fantastic. It really is fantastic. And I would recommend anyone get used to and get into playing that game. It offers the top R-Type experience, in my opinion. It really is a fantastic title. And once you get used to the polygonal graphics and such like, it's a treat. It really is a treat of a game to play. And R-Types, of course, is fantastic also. But there's so many great titles in this series, and hopefully in this video, it's almost 3 hours long. Hopefully you've been able to find or see, like, you know, something that you've not seen before, and just think to check it out and keep the torch burning. Keep those embers in the fire, no matter how dim it may be. I don't think R-Type is ever going to truly die. Thanks a lot for staying with me for all this time. Time is valuable, and I'm glad that you've enjoyed this video. Hopefully you have. It's a lot to watch if you haven't, but I hope it's provided something interesting, something fun. You've enjoyed listening to me rambling on over the top of these excellent games. And ultimately, this is Deacon for 4G Gaming, signing off. And I'll see you all on the other side.